And welcome, Girish Muckai. We're so glad to have you on today. Girish, we'd love to just start off by hearing a little bit about your career trajectory and what brought you to Heal. Can you give us a sense of your background and sort of what your journeys look like?
Yeah, Ken, first of all, it's a privilege and honor to be here with you. I think you're transforming the way media and technology is playing out. So thank you for that. Happy to be here. So I got very fortunate. I came to this country, went to grad school, and then started working in the telecom communication networking industry. Spent a couple decades there, and the AI bug hit me, a number of years ago. So went to a startup that actually developed conversational chatbot solutions for enterprises using natural language processing, and that has been my journey into the field of AI ML. That company subsequently got acquired by ServiceNow, and I joined Heal a number of years ago, essentially to help the company position globally and bring its products into a number of enterprises across the world. So very thrilled to be here and very happy to be talking to you today.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Interesting. Tell me a little bit about Heal. When was Heal founded? What's its journey been like through ITOps and really this AI ops sort of landscape? How did you guys come into this space, and what gives you your unique perspective?
Absolutely, Ken. So Heal started just a couple of years ago here in Santa Clara, based in Silicon Valley. However, the company's genesis goes back into more than a decade, when it got started by an architect for a financial software company, software that he was developing, and he saw that there was a need for monitoring applications and providing application performance, which was a very hard problem at that time. So he started this company, which at that time was called Appnomic, with that intent. And he knew that the customers needed this because he was right in the middle of that software. And at that time, AI ML was in its infancy. However, application performance was an area that was gaining traction. So the product that Appnomic at that time developed helped financial institutions, especially in the BFSI, the broadly what we call BFSI industry, to when they deal with large number of transactions, when they deal with seasonalities, when they deal with uh, an environment where things change quite a bit. You put an ad in one of the biggest sporting events, and the next morning, transaction volume increases 5x. So in order to deal with all that, the solution at that time was to observe, which is monitor the performance of the application and infrastructure, and then use that information to provide not only visibility but also provide the tools and the ability for the IT operations people to act on it. Of course, fast forward to last number of years, thankfully, machine learning and AI as an entire area has grown significantly, and the tools and the abilities and the capabilities and the models and the interpretations and the stuff available has really enabled us to not only look at and monitor these applications, or observe, in other words, but also apply machine learning and AI tools and techniques to that. So it becomes, not only that we can address what the problem was, but also we can predict what could be a problem based on learning from the past. And thirdly, automate this stuff along with the rest of the IT environment, so that you can literally act on it, as opposed to just knowing that you're going to be in bad shape, but can you do something about it? So that's what the genesis of Heal is. So the key tenets of what we do: observability is one piece. Second piece is the ability to do AI based analytics. And then the third piece is we call predictive healing or automation. We work with other systems in the IT landscape. And today, as you know, IT environments are it's not a monolithic one system anymore. It's a combination of so many systems. So we want to make sure that for an IT ops person, we provide the right bells and whistles and the right knobs that they can touch as they need it, they need. And when they decide that it is indeed a problem, that they can actually just put a trigger button and things will automatically happen.
Got it.
So the team has evolved from, to your question, IT ops Many companies now have AI ops teams, they're called, especially large enterprises. Given their focus is, they're not just going to do pure operations, but also apply AI and machine learning tools, which has been a key driver for many CIOs over the past many years.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So, Heal's legacies really comes from an IT ops sort of background, and now you're applying AI ops into the IT ops role. Um, One of the things that it's really kind of captured my attention about your approach is Heal really seems to have a focus on user experiences and thinking about what are users' experiences as they're touching applications, as they're experiencing not just the entire application, but any given individual feature. Why is this has this user experience focused approach really taken a hold at Heal, and what does it mean in terms of how your teams think about product, think about delivery?
Yeah, taking COVID as an example, right? All of a sudden, at least many people across the world, we started. We are always remote. We are in front of a screen. We are in front of a device, and we expect a level of experience like never before, right? It doesn't matter what time of the day or night or weekday or weekend. We want to be able to order what we want, whether it's food or grocery or anything else, and we want to deliver to us as soon as possible. Of course, way before that, this requirement or expectation or a need from users have started to accelerate and grow. And thanks to cloud, thanks to mobile devices, thanks to many other connectivity options that we have, this has become the norm. It's no longer an exception anymore. So user experience for a business, if I'm an enterprise that is providing a solution, if I'm a bank offering a internet banking solution, it's very important for me that my users get the same level of experience. Of course, the switching costs of late have come down. You can now go from one bank to the other, or you can go from one retailer to another. You can go from one ride hailing service to another one quickly. So, which means that in order to retain those users, you need to provide a consistent and superior user experience at all times. And also, as we know, for SaaS companies, can the some of the metrics that determine the company's valuations, is all about average users or monthly average users, churn, etc. So all the way to the board, these metrics are the ones that are actually visible, which means that if there is degradation in that, and we know very quickly, thanks to social media and the way information is shared between people, any bad news gets spread out very quickly. So the degradation in user experience could be devastating for a company, and we have seen many instances of that. So that's why it's important to provide that need is, the bar is high today. And that's why SaaS companies in particular, as well as any enterprise that's providing software-based solutions, are on the hook in order to ensure that this is met. And in order to do this, obviously a lot of factors that come into play, and I'm sure we'll talk more on that.
Yeah. Traditionally, IT ops always played a critical role in enterprise software companies, for example. But nowadays, with user experience being such an important suite of metrics and being so core to the very existence of the company, it seems like there are far more teams that are familiar with the IT ops function at all than ever were in the past. And it seems like they get blamed for just about everything when in fact there's so much happening around the organization and they only have so much bandwidth. There's only so much they can do. It's really difficult times to be IT ops.
Totally, Ken. I think IT ops teams are on the hot seat, right? Literally, and the people that we talk to, we interact with, medium and large enterprises across multiple verticals across the world. The IT ops teams, you can feel it when you talk to them. They are dreading anything that goes wrong. They don't want any problems to happen or anomalies to happen, or they get the phone call saying, hey, this thing broke, this thing is not working. By the way, this happens to not just the average enterprise there. It happens to even the mighty, right? You've
Mm-hmm.
seen Amazon, which is as good as it gets when it comes to the IT environment. Facebook, now Meta, they have experienced problems multiple times over the past year, which actually goes on to show that the problem is not just with how you design, but also how you're able to operation side of it. So that's why IT ops, it's always a great idea at the beginning. You design something, you set it all up, you think it's airtight, but it's never the case. Things change a lot. I mean, we live in an environment where things go from on-prem to cloud. Applications are moving on a daily basis for many enterprises. A bank that we've been talking to out here in the southern part of the country, they used to be primarily all on-prem. They have moved about 80% of their applications to the cloud, and they'll be doing the remaining 20% within the next several months. And for them, that transformation period or transition period is very tough, because you're going from an area that you know well to an area that you're still trying to figure out. So the teams within those enterprises, IT ops teams in particular, they have to really learn a whole lot of things in a very short amount of time. Makes it really challenging. Not only technologies, as we know, I mean, technologies in the cloud, change. By the time we started
Hmm.
this discussion, I'm sure three more features got added at AWS and Azure, right?
Yep.
So keeping up with that is not easy. So for them, on one side, they're under pressure to provide the right user experience and service level. On the other side, there is a cost aspect, because the reason why you're moving to the cloud is because you want to optimize your cost structure and to be able to scale up and down pretty rapidly. And then on the third side, you need to provide those business outcomes that matter for the company. I mean, IT ops is not about providing IT operations, but to ensure that the business outcomes are met on a daily basis, whether it be average users, the number of transactions completed, or people eventually the top line to the company or the bottom line. So it's a tough job,
Yeah.
and I think admiration and kudos and hats off to the folks that actually toil it out in there. But having said that, however good they are, as human beings, they can only do so much. That's why they need the machines to help them scale and understand better, because we can only look things at one screen, one level.
Yeah.
The machines, they dig in more.
I think about, and part of what you're saying, I think about the layperson and their perception of SaaS industry, SaaS companies, big SaaS platforms. And I think they think of Facebook or Amazon going down as being just a factor of how big those platforms are. They can't quite comprehend it. Maybe none of us can, but just it's so large and so big. Of course, something would break on occasion, and I need to know what it is. And that's actually not accurate. I've seen plenty of companies around here in Silicon Valley, here in San Francisco, with 10,000 users where the stack starts collapsing or has availability issues of specific fields or specific functions not working accurately. So a scale less than a percent of a percent of a percent of the size of Facebook's stack, similar problems arising. And again, all of this kind of comes down to ITOps, to SRE, to DevOps. And one of the things that I think really drives this is this concept I'd like to talk about of the acceleration of IT innovation. When you started a software company 10, 15 years ago, you had a database server, you had an application server. Your overall stack was relatively straightforward, right? You were deploying to maybe some third-party data center. Maybe you were deploying to early Heroku in the early days. But overall, I would just say anecdotally, the stack was not that complex. Your application logic was right inside the application within a couple tiers, maybe some custom stuff on the database, not that much usually as a best practice. And there you went. Nowadays, we've got acceleration of IT innovation in all sorts of different aspects of infrastructure, of the applications at the application layer, and within operations themselves. I want to drill into that a little bit. So I kind of like to get my head around how complex modern SaaS stacks are getting. Let's start maybe with infrastructure. How is modern infrastructure impacting application availability at scale?
Yeah, it's very complex, right? We have the infrastructure side, you typically have a compute, storage, network layers, and we have gone away. Earlier, we used to have only physical devices. Now we are able to virtualize all of these layers. Compute we've been virtualizing for a long time. Storage we've been doing that for a while, and network, now we have succeeded in virtualizing as well. So with that, you have a ton of stuff that abstracts out. So it's very hard to put a finger on something and say, hey, it's this router that is a problem, or it's this router that is not doing well anymore. You don't see anything anymore. It's virtual. And secondly, it is also existing in other places where you don't touch it anymore, right?
Hmm.
Earlier you would hold everything in your enterprise data center, but now with the cloud, you are now having a network device or a compute device or a virtual machine or a Kubernetes container, microservice environment thing somewhere in the cloud, and you have no idea where that is.
Hmm.
So it's on one side, it's the lack of visibility. Second is it is ever moving, it's dynamic on a constant basis, which means you don't know what the exact underlying topology is, even though there is a virtual topology that you can get your hands on, but it changes, and then the what is underneath, you don't have visibility. Number three, the issue is when a problem happens, you need to first know whether the problem is because of sheer increasing demand, right? I mean, you can have
Hmm.
more users. It's a good problem to have, as they say.
Hmm.
Of course, once you have that, you want to increase capacity, and the natural tendency for us and IT ops teams and SREs, site reliability engineers, is to, if your traffic increases three times, you increase everything three times, and that really doesn't solve the problem, right? The choke points are not necessarily uniformly distributed across your infrastructure. It may be that one place needs 10x in capacity, whereas the other place needs only one and a half times increase in capacity. And some places may not even need increase in capacity.
Hmm.
So just by increasing 3x doesn't solve the problem at all. In fact, your problem just got shifted from one place to another, and then you wonder, I spent three times more money, and I'm still having the same problem.
Hmm.
So it's important to get granularity, visibility at a level that is needed. Second is to tie in, what is coming in and what is expected and what is really happening, right? That's where going back to observability is critical, because when you monitor the CPU utilization or the memory or a network availability and so on, you eliminate the first order problem. If something is constantly more than 95% utilization, you need to increase capacity, you have a problem there.
Hmm.
That's not always the case. You need to tie that infrastructure with the application. In the case of Facebook outage that happened last year, it was an application and the network doing things separately, and it was not visible because the teams that are managing these are two separate teams. So they couldn't tell, as human beings and as the way the teams are structured, they couldn't tell. Whereas if you had let a machine go in and look at and do a correlation, it could have been, I'm saying that, it would be possible to say that, hey, there is something funky going on here and we need to do something about it. And it can percolate that up to an IT ops or an AI ops person that can then go in and look at it, especially if it can tell you. In many cases, again, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, right? First of all, you need to know if there's a needle, and then second is you need to know which haystack the needle is in, and then the third is which general smaller region that it's in, so that you can now go in and pick it out. So in many cases, we don't even know there's a needle. All we know is something is poking us,
Yeah.
and we don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's talk about applications. So applications are changing just as rapidly as the underlying infrastructure they're sitting on top of. Once upon a time, all your application logic, I mean, there are some well-known software companies that their application logic was, more or less in one part of their application file system. I mean, in a very concentrated place, 90% of their logic lived. And nowadays, with the rise of microservices, uh, you can have functionality that's performing critical roles across your platform happening in multiple clouds on multiple on-prem applications. I mean, it's just everywhere nowadays. How is sort of the modern way that we build applications changing the complexity of troubleshooting what's going wrong for IT ops teams?
Yeah. So applications, as you said, can the velocity of change is just incredible, right? I mean, you're adding, with the CI/CD agile framework, you could be adding features on a very frequent basis. And whereas the infrastructure side, the velocity of change is much smaller, right? If you look at traditional networking devices, they have a typical lifespan of 7 years. So you don't change those out for 7 years at least, right? And same and the compute infrastructure, of course, you do change out a lot more often. Maybe the software side of it, if not the hardware. Um, However, the application side is just the velocity is much higher. And then you're also doing, with the CI/CD framework, you're doing, dev, test, and then eventually rolling out to the prod side of it. So which means that the ability for guaranteeing the user experience, end of the day, it's all user
Mhm,
focused, which
mhm,
means it's application focused. Our philosophy at Heal is, we believe that the user is the ultimate customer for us, which means the application that serves the user, that's what we control. We can't control the user. We can only control the application. We can only monitor the application. That becomes our central tenet. So everything is based and optimized on that. So with this architecture that you mentioned, especially with the new architecture, it the complexity of not only monitoring but also finding the root cause is a non-trivial problem.
mhm,
Right? It's no longer that you have, seven possibilities, and you're picking between one of the seven. It's infinite possibilities. So first of all, what AI ops does is, if you let it learn over a period of time, let's say 1 or 2 weeks or more, it can understand seasonalities, right? Depending on how often the seasonalities happen. If it happens on a daily basis, couple weeks is good enough. If it happens on a weekly basis, then you sort of train it over a multiple week time period.
mhm,
It can tease out the seasonalities, which means it knows that, a Monday or a Tuesday, this is what happens. So I know this is likely to happen. And if there's a deviation, that's what you kind of want to do. So you control for the seasonality. Number two, you control for business driven stuff, right? You have a promotion for a particular holiday, um, President's Day car sale, and if you're a car dealership, you know that your application that is going to deal with number of people that are going to come in and check out your cars or buy through your site is going to increase by a certain amount. So previous learnings, that if I put an ad in a number of TV stations, I will have 60% increase the next morning, right, or the next couple of days. So I
mhm,
can factor that in as well. Then the third is completely unanticipated stuff, and that's what, end of the day, we want to be able to find out rather quickly. First of all, expected behavior and actual behavior. If there's a statistically significant difference, then you start going and digging in and finding out what the problem could be, the root cause. So once you identify that, then you can figure out what the potential solutions could be, because it's never good enough to say that you have a problem. Just like what
mhm.
we don't go to our bosses and say we have a problem. We need to go in and say, here are two or three possible solutions.
Yeah.
Let's debate on which one is better. That's the same approach that we like to take as well. But just to close out to your question, with this architecture, with the pace, velocity of application development, feature development, it's important to know all of this and constantly learn. So it's not a one-time exercise. It is a non-stop, daily, everyday thing that the machine has to do. And human beings, we can never do that. We
Yeah.
all have short-term memories, right? I'm not sure if I mentioned we all have short-term memories, but
You know, I'm going to engage my long-term memory for a moment and think back. I began my career 20 years ago at PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting, and I remember the religion of day one. We have a thing called unit testing. We have a thing called system testing. We've got a thing called integration testing. And once upon a time, you were do a deployment once a quarter, maybe a couple times a year in the big client server applications, right? Nowadays, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of SaaS companies doing is a whole different religion of deploying not just daily, but some companies are deploying dozens, even hundreds of times a day. I kind of want to piggyback on what you were talking about earlier and get your perspective on what are SaaS companies experiencing when it comes to continuous integration and deployment in environments where they're deploying many times a day. How is that stressing IT ops?
Yeah, it's a huge issue for them. So number one, typical SaaS company grows like crazy, especially at the initial stages and later through potentially through acquisitions and all that. We have seen it, right? So they have this, hockey stick growth. So to deal with that itself is quite hard. That's on one side. Second side is they deploy the resources they deploy on cost can just explode like crazy. As we know, for SaaS companies, on one side, customer acquisition cost is quite high in general. Again, there are exceptions there, but the norm is the CACs are very high.
Mm.
If they spend a lot of money on infrastructure, which is disproportionate to the growth of the top line, it becomes a serious issue. The unit economics, go down the tube for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's one challenge that they have. Second challenge is um, they deploy things, as you said. It's the new architecture, and they oftentimes it's all in various. They patch the methodology for SaaS companies is you take whatever software or system that's available that is best for you, and then you just integrate it. And these days, thanks to phenomenal development in the API in the API space, we can do that, right? We can just put together a large number of items and make it all work. It's like an orchestra. So
Mm-hmm.
SaaS company, think of it as a orchestra, and the IT ops. I wouldn't call the IT ops person the conductor of the orchestra, but someone who has to make sure that everything is playing right. So the it's a serious challenge on the velocity of change, the pace with which features are rolled out, as you said, and at the same time trying to optimize the cost without just throwing money out from a helicopter. It is seriously challenging, and where does the burden come on? The IT ops person, because feature development is great, right? You say, I need this new feature, have these customers, I can sell it, I can price it, I can market it, all that on one side. But if the thing doesn't work after the customer comes on, the gun gets pointed at the IT ops person.
Yeah.
And what we have found is that they struggle at times. Certain the cloud environments give you certain metrics. They're not sufficient. The other things that you deploy, they give you metrics. They're not sufficient. And oftentimes to find out where the problem is, it is not easy. That means you need to have a much bigger, broader view, much detailed view, correlating across the different entities, and then being able to quickly know what the problem is and where the problem is, because you cannot afford, after you roll out a new offering, that things go down. That is disastrous for the company, especially for a
Yeah.
SaaS company, because your entire mantra is, hey, I can give you a new feature every Monday morning, but now that you love the feature and you come on board, it doesn't work. It's
Yeah.
that's why
You
it's
know, you kind of make me think about another aspect of this, which leads into sort of this third dimension of this acceleration of IT innovation around operations. We think about deploying all the time, and that um, used to be a controlled process. And by used to be, I mean 5, 10 years ago, there was some order to the process. Maybe only one team was actually deploying to production, and everything was going through them. And once upon a time, it was relatively easy to understand what was being changed in the application at any given layer. Nowadays, you've got multiple teams deploying to production. You've got all sorts of, there are cases where there are dozens, there are hundreds of different teams that have the ability to make changes to infrastructure configurations, to the application or suites of applications, or in a microservices world, functions that just are floating somewhere on any piece of infrastructure, who knows what. Well, I wonder, So root cause analysis is sort of the heart of what IT ops is doing, at least when they're remediating something that's happened, some type of defect. How are IT ops teams dealing with multiple versions of themselves, having to deconflict all sorts of stuff that's happening across a whole wide variety of infrastructure and applications to figure out what caused this? How does root cause analysis get managed, particularly in SaaS enterprises where there's more teams and more sophistication?
Yeah. So yes. So when things all work well, it's all great. And when things move in a dynamic environment, we need to adapt, and that's what happens. Whether it's growth up, scaling down, things changing, new features, things taken out. Yes. So IT ops teams at that point for them, as human beings, and I've heard this from many IT ops and AI ops teams, there's a lot of tribal knowledge. So they know a lot of bells and whistles and tweaks that they can do to keep certain things going. I think
Mm-hmm.
almost every team out there that we have spoken to and we work with, great level of appreciation for how they manage to keep the whole thing up
Yeah.
and running, right? It's
Yeah.
incredible. But having said that, they
If the
have
CEO only knew sometimes.
correct. Exactly, exactly. They need to double their salaries, So, but having said that, they reach their limit fairly quickly, beyond which it's not physically possible. It's not because of you know capability or knowledge, right? It's just sheer limit. You cannot do beyond that. Which, as an example, what happens in an infrastructure and a network side, what happens in an application side, what happens in a database side, what happens with a particular module of SAP if you're running as an aspect. It's impossible for a human being to look at all of that and correlate and say, we are terrible human beings at correlation, right? We are bad at predicting, we are bad at correlation as human beings, right? That's not our strength. Our strength is when we see, we call a spade a spade. We know how to do that really, really well, better than
Mm-hmm.
a machine. But when we are shown seven different things, it's very hard for us to do. And this applies when you look at metrics, right? When we collect metrics, we get a metric every minute, right? So you're talking about thousands and millions and of that level, right? Same
Mm-hmm.
thing with alerts. When you look at a large enterprise, the number of alerts that you get, goes in millions and billions over a year. Could be tens of thousands a week, right? In that range. So knowing what is related to what, what causes what, is a very hard problem for human beings after a while. Very simple.
Mm-hmm.
For certain things, 30-40% of things they can do it, but beyond that, the limit is reached. That's why when there is a real problem, of course, there are a lot of false positives. So even determining whether something is a false positive or not is also a problem to begin with. That's where machines and AI can help quite a bit. You can look at similar alerts, you can correlate them, and then you can say, these are all related to the same problem, so you don't need to worry about these 100 problems. It's actually one, right? So machine can do that a lot better than human beings. Second is, once you know there is a problem, what is the underlying root cause? It's very hard to go in and look at every single dashboard and metric and then
Mm-hmm.
correlate and come up with it. That's where AI can shine, and that's where the solution that we apply at Heal, we allow that to happen. And the way you allow that to happen is using two sets of things. One is metrics related to applications and infrastructure, and the second is the alerts and events data that come in. By using that information, we can learn, we can train, we have developed these models that then can predict and then come to the root cause rather quickly.
Hmm.
Because the key is, when there's a problem, the time to resolution or time to remediation, and the term is MTTR, mean
Mm-hmm.
time to resolution. That is one metric that every IT ops person, CIO to down to IT ops person, wants to reduce. So what we have done is, and what we have found is, by applying these techniques, we can definitely reduce that very, very significantly with the approach that we have, right? So
Yeah.
that's number one. Second piece is, even incidents happening, by preventing incidents, we can actually prolong the mean time between incidents, MTBI, right? So that becomes another really good metric as well, where hey, first of all, if you know a problem is going to happen, if you can do something about it ahead of time, a priori, if you're confident, of course, it doesn't mean that you keep
Hmm.
re-doing stuff every minute of the day, but if you're reasonably confident, right? That's a beauty of machine learning too. If you design the models correctly and if you apply it correctly, use the right data, it can give you confidence level, and it can also give you solution recommendations. It can
Yeah.
find the cause for you. So we are at that stage, and I think in the SaaS world, as you mentioned, Ken, it's even more important because of the velocity of change and because of the user expectations and because of the cost issue for them.
Yeah. When you've got IT teams, IT operations teams, or multiple IT ops teams, um, I get the sense that sort of in modern platforms, it's difficult for them to know with clarity which teams are actually responsible for which problems, or to understand, how to who should take responsibility, or how to work the problem even. I get the sense that's a real challenge out there. And one of the things that I've been thinking, I've been wondering, um, as a really important best practice that emerged, that's always been around, but that's changed and evolved over the last several years, has been around building good topologies of your all of your infrastructure, all of your applications. And nowadays, again, you mentioned, we've got containers spinning up and going away and virtual infrastructure all over the place. It's not so easy to keep track of ever growing topologies. What are ITOps teams doing now? Are they able to keep their topologies sort of organized and up to date? Is that even possible and practical? How are they sort of trying to, sort of get their arms around their topologies and keep and sort of keep on track of things?
Yeah, topology is very key, Ken, because anything that a system like this, an AIOps tool, comes up with, the topology becomes a big issue, big underlying, necessary condition there. And as you said, with the evolving environments, the topology continues to evolve and change. CMDB is a typical way many companies do. There is only a small fraction of those companies that are able to keep the CMDB constantly updated. It's actually a rarity. It's an exception,
Hmm.
not the norm, right? If they have it, it's great. Then we can with ITSM tools like ServiceNow and all that. With a good CMDB, we can get that, and then we can leverage it and constantly update it. But if that's not the case, it becomes important for a AIOps tool to go in and continue to update the topology. So there are auto discovery mechanisms where if you put an agent, it can go in and discover the elements. It can actually get the relevant topology built out of that automatically. There are very rare conditions under which you need to do that manually, or you may just have to tweak it here and there. But if you build it, and then if it has the ability to continuously update it, then that's what you need. Then, if you have correlations, then you can create a causal graph, which means, um, this A causes B and B causes C and D, etc. Right? And
Yeah.
that causal graph depends a lot on the topology so that it becomes more accurate. Number two, if there is a problem, when you mentioned about root causes, root cause analysis requires a topology because once you need to know where to go to find the root cause. So you go up or down the topology tree to eventually pinpoint and do that. So very important piece, but the tools available today allow us to construct the topology and keep it updated on a constant basis, especially now with, as you mentioned, physical devices, virtual devices, things that are in the cloud, on-prem, hybrid. It's a mess.
Yeah.
If you the other day I saw a picture of one of these, and it's tough. It's a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
It's overwhelming is what I'd have. I mean, your network diagrams, the good old classic, 20 years ago, they were kind of pretty. They were organized. You felt good. You felt your anxiety level lowered. you look at a topology map now, your anxiety level is not going down. I
Yeah.
guarantee it. You
No,
know,
even though it's
and that
supposed to be simpler. It's supposed to be
yeah,
simple today, but evidently not.
yeah, it's supposed to be. And that kind of makes me think about. I hear a lot of discussion when it comes to sort of managing at a high level, overseeing our platforms. I hear a bit of this debate between a domain centric approach and a domain agnostic approach, whereby domain centric building, you're just mentioning CMDBs are getting very difficult to keep up to date, certainly not manually anymore, like we used to do in Visio, right? And nowadays we're using, domain centric tools to help build topologies of a specific application or to understand a specific infrastructure cluster. But I'm also here, and there's reason to keep doing that. And in some cases, you can't really do better job of understanding one domain centric aspect of your platform than really focusing in on it. And sometimes that's necessary. But I hear to do that across the entirety of a stack, from infrastructure, platform, operational tools, is a project that would never end. It would take many, many, many months, many, many teams, and you're always going to be sort of chasing it. And so I've been hearing more about domain agnostic approaches as almost being sort of the first step to get your arms around everything you can get your arms around somewhat readily across a platform, and to start drawing correlations and start discovering some root causes. What is it that you see and I'd love to hear sort of from banking, from telco into SaaS, what some of the experiences you've been seeing around this sort of domain agnostic approach.
Yeah. So the domain approach can the ability for what you interface with, automation piece, the workflows, etc. They are very domain oriented, right? And that depends on the specific application, the specific IT environment, etc. However, when you look at AI ops, ability to manage, monitor applications, and then fix problems, identify problems, and fix them before they happen, the domain part on that aspect is actually not that critical, because you need these different pieces. Piece number one, you need to get metrics right about the applications and infrastructure. That can be obtained by whatever tool is out there. So earlier, you had APM tools where they said you have to put my agent, and then only you can get the metrics that you need.
Mm-hmm.
The approach that we have taken is, and then many others are taking nowadays, is you don't need our own agent. You can put our agent if you don't have one. However, if you already have ways to collect data, we will just simply put a connector and ingest that into us. So the mantra there is, if you collect data once, you should never collect that again. You should be able to use it, right? So that's the one of the principles that we go with. So whether it's, if you look at AWS or Azure, they have
Mm-hmm.
monitoring tools in the cloud they offer, right? CloudWatch and App Insights in Azure, CloudWatch and AWS.
Mm-hmm.
We can input that data readily into our system. Same thing goes for other, if there's a network monitoring tool, we can actually ingest data from that. So the point is, ingestion data is there, and if there are logs coming from Splunk, we can take that in. If there are alerts that are stored in ServiceNow, we can actually ingest that stuff, right? So the key part of domain agnosticity is being able to get data from whatever source, wherever it's available, if it's available. Otherwise, you should have a method to go and fetch it. That's one. Second is, there is a lot of transfer learning approaches that we can apply. One part of machine learning is called transfer learning, where a particular type of application, it doesn't have to be the same vertical. If you know that, hey, when you're running high transaction volume applications in the cloud as a SaaS service, for example, here are the metrics that matter. In fact, we end up collecting hundreds and hundreds of metrics. In reality, what really happens is, 5 to 10 metrics matter. Other things are really, placebo, right? They don't really have any effect. So if you know from one customer that, these 5 metrics are the ones that really matter, you start with those 5 metrics, as opposed to starting with boiling the entire, Pacific Ocean, and then, going to a pint of water, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Number two piece is, what do you do with fixing a problem once you identify a problem? So if you can discover the topology, it's domain agnostic. It doesn't matter which domain that you're in, right? And then if you're also able to go from on-prem to cloud to SaaS, that's what we have done. We have multiple
Mhm.
deployment models, which means that you're domain agnostic, right? It doesn't matter if you're a bank. Typically, they used to be on even now. Bulk of the key applications in banks are on-prem. Whereas if you look at healthcare companies, they've started putting a lot of the applications to the cloud. If you look at Kaiser Permanente here, they've been working with IBM and now with Microsoft, putting many of the applications in the cloud. Or if you look at SaaS companies today, where they run many of them run a mixed infrastructure. They have their own IT environment where they actually run their stuff while they use one or more cloud providers to increase capacity or to burst, right, as they say.
Mhm.
So in all of that, it's about getting the right metrics, getting the right topology, getting the right alerts. Then the system can figure out. But after that, what do you do with it? What is your philosophy of updating things? How things are done? What rule books do you follow? What is the process for incident management or problem resolution? Those processes are very domain centric. So that's
Mhm.
where the domain part comes into play. But from the AI ops point of view itself, we want to be more and more domain agnostic today.
Yeah. How do you sort of recommend IT ops teams um, think about assessing the application monitoring landscape, which is kind of built on what you're talking about here? How do you guide them to think about um, domain centricity versus domain agnostic approaches? What are some of the key bullets that they need? What are some of the key things they need to understand about their stack in terms of data volume, silos, strengths, weaknesses?
Right. So I think number one is never lose sight of what is the business outcome. We are doing all of this not for the fun of it, right? It is all done because you want to get a certain business outcome. I think tying that and keeping that as the top of the pyramid is extremely important. As you have seen, the role of CIOs have evolved over the years, right? Today, CIO is more and more accountable for the business aspects, not just a separate service function, ensuring that your server is up and running, right? So that is one. So keeping that in mind, it is always going and going down from there, and looking at how did I pick a particular what are my design choices, and when I pick this design choice, what matters, what can I abstract out of it that would actually affect the business outcome. So in other words, if my other banks, if I'm a bank and the other banks are doing this this way, yeah, I'm more inclined to do it this way. But having said that, today, I should go in and look at what is out there. If you look at security, for example, there is a lot more security available in the cloud today than you could do as a smaller company. So you want to also look at what is your skill set, to not just to put something in place but to evolve, right? So in the domain centric world, it becomes a little harder to evolve on pace. Whereas in a domain agnostic world, you get the best of what others have learned, and you can leverage that to evolve much faster. And also sometimes
Mhm.
the robustness of the solutions are also much better. So I would sort of look at it that way. And then third is, if you look at um, the best practices for this, is I whatever I put in, whether I take this approach for whatever reason, you need to know why I'm making this choice. But nevertheless, you still want to be able to observe or monitor that from an IT ops point of view. Number two, you need to be able to get enough information to know where the problem is. So you need to have that information. And then the third is, you need to have the ability to act on it within the constraints of the organization. So, if an organization requires approval for, adding capacity beyond a certain point from a certain level of person, then we need to make sure that that is factored into that
Mhm.
approach. In SaaS companies, typically that won't be the case. The SRE is, literally carte blanche,
Mhm.
other than
Yeah.
justifying it. Right? They don't need to keep going and knocking on 11 different forms to be filled, and then getting approval. You do the thing and then ask for forgiveness later if you
Yeah.
fall short. So I think it depends on the type of company you are in, and then what your policies are, so you can tie in accordingly. But I think more and more people are evolving towards, increasing capacity by itself is not enough. But having said that, the part of the AIOps tool, one of the byproducts is that you can optimize at a very granular level the capacity, right? For example, if you look across our customers, we have helped optimize capacity, and especially the cost associated with it by more than 30%, because of this approach that we can take. Um, and I think going forward, if you are designing something from the ground up, I would design it for a domain agnostic approach. But having said that, you need to make sure that what matters to your domain from a business point of view, regulatory point of view, process point of view, and audit point of view is kept in place.
Yeah, that's excellent. Um, let's finish with just sort of. I'd love to just wrap all this up into just what are the key impacts? We've touched on it. The key impacts to SaaS organizations right now from this very, very complexified IT environment and platforms that are now um, almost incomprehensible. What's out there, what they've got, how they're functioning. What are the major impacts to SaaS organizations that are trying to manually continue to manage IT ops functions and are not sort of bringing AI ops into the picture yet?
Yeah, it's a tough call. I think for SaaS organizations that I really believe that they should do these following things. One is, they have a lot of tools. If they have cloud deployments, they get enough tools from the cloud. So leverage whatever you have. That's rule number one. Rule number two, understand your environment really well, which means you need to observe and report out, which means you know what's going on. Especially in an SaaS, companies are going through an ever changing, week by week is very different for each SaaS
Mhm.
company. So you need to sort of know that. Number three, you need to be able to get to the root cause of a problem very, very quickly. I think SaaS companies offer service level agreements,
Mhm.
99.99 or even 99.999%. And it's a disaster, right? Both from a monetary point of view, as well as brand point of view, as well as from a customer valuation point of view as well. So they need to be able to, mean time between incidents. They need to expand that like crazy. I think they need to keep that as a metric and figure out ways to do. And then if there is a problem, they need to be able to find the root cause. As you alluded to many times, can be able to get to that rather quickly so that they can resolve. So mean time to resolution, MTTR, should be very, very low. And then the third part is, given that they're distributed IT environment and with multiple software systems and elements that are in play that work through API calls and all that, having the AI ops and IT ops and application level visibility, which is centered on their user experience, and then always knowing what is going on and what is deteriorating, if at all, very key. And then finally, the fourth is cost. Uh, I've heard SaaS companies, very small to medium, complain about how quickly their cloud bill, skyrockets.
I've experienced it.
Yeah. There you go.
How
Exactly.
quickly? I mean, it's hours sometimes. Especially when you look at once you see the alert, like, wow, the bill just went up quite a bit. And then you look at the forecast for the end of the month and your jaw drops. What did we
Right.
change, guys? Let's have a meeting real quick.
So
Awesome. Well, hey, Girish, it's been great. I've really picked up a lot on sort of the state of IT ops and what they're dealing with in our modern SaaS stacks. Of course, I live and breathe it. Most of my friends around town live and breathe it. Um, and it just seems to us like things are getting more and more complex, even though every year we're told the stack's getting simpler. We sense that's not the case. um, I hope to talk to you again in the future. I think I would love to start diving into the nuts and bolts of AI ops. Obviously, we covered the entire platform today in terms of what's happening and what their experience, where the challenges are. And across that entire platform, innovative AI leaders like at Heal are thinking about how can AI be applied to this challenge over here, over here. And I suspect that over the next few years, our jaws are going to drop by how much transformation of the ITOps function AI is able to bring. And I think it's going to be, very exciting to see how it moves forward. And I hope to learn more from you about what's going on in the world of AI ops. Thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to having you on again.
Thank you, Ken. Totally appreciate it. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. And thank you for transforming the learning process for the world. So again, kudos to you and team in making that happen.
Thanks. We'll get there. It's going to be fun. All right. Thank you much.
Thank you so much.